What if the more you love someone, the more they pull away? What if every text, every act of kindness, every attempt to get closer only seems to create more distance? Most people think the answer is to try harder, love harder, and prove their worth. But when you're dealing with an avoidant person, that strategy often backfires. The truth is shocking. The moment you stop chasing, stop pleading, and start protecting your own value, everything changes. Today, we're going to explore why you have to be ruthless, not cruel, not heartless, but ruthlessly committed to your self-respect when dealing with an avoidant. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with an avoidant person is believing that a more effort will eventually create more connection. It feels logical, doesn't it? If someone is distant, you move closer. If they seem unsure, you reassure them. If they pull away, you chase after them to prove how much you care. Most people act this way because they believe love is demonstrated through persistence. They think that if they just say the right thing, do the right thing, or love hard enough, the avoidant person will finally feel safe enough to stay. But what often happens is the exact opposite. The more you chase an avoidant, the more pressure they feel. Even when your intentions are good, your constant pursuit can feel overwhelming to someone who naturally associates closeness with a loss of freedom. While you see your actions as expressions of love, they may experience them as expectations, obligations, or emotional demands. The harder you push for connection, the stronger their instinct becomes to create distance. Suddenly, you find yourself trapped in a frustrating cycle. You move toward them, they move away. You seek reassurance, they become quieter. You try to fix the relationship, and they become even more withdrawn. This is where many people become exhausted. They spend countless hours analyzing text messages, replaying conversations in their minds, and searching for ways to bring the avoidant closer. Every day becomes focused on managing the relationship. They start checking their phone constantly, wondering why the response took longer than usual. They become hyper-aware of every small change in behavior. A delayed reply feels like rejection. A cancelled plan feels like abandonment. Before long, their emotional state is completely dependent on another person's willingness to engage. What makes this even more painful is that chasing rarely produces the result people hope for. Instead of creating intimacy, it often destroys attraction and respect. When you constantly pursue someone who keeps stepping away, you unknowingly communicate a dangerous message. I am willing to abandon my own needs just to keep you around. Over time, this weakens your position in the relationship. You stop operating from confidence and start operating from fear. Every action becomes motivated by anxiety rather than self-respect. Think about it. When someone knows they can withdraw whenever they want, and you'll always be there waiting, what incentive do they have to change their behavior? What reason do they have to confront their own fears, improve their communication, or invest more deeply in the relationship? The dynamic becomes one-sided. One person is doing all the emotional labor, while the other person controls the distance. The truth is that healthy relationships are not built through pursuit. They are built through mutual effort. Connection should flow in both directions. Both people should be moving toward each other. Both people should be investing, communicating, and showing up consistently. When you're the only one carrying the relationship, you're not building intimacy, you're carrying a burden. This is why you must learn to stop chasing, not because you want to punish the avoidant, not because you're trying to play games, and certainly not because you want revenge. You stop chasing because your self-respect matters. You stop chasing because no relationship is worth sacrificing your peace of mind. You stop chasing because constantly pursuing someone who keeps creating distance is emotionally draining and ultimately unsustainable. Many people fear that if they stop chasing, they'll lose the person forever, but that's exactly the fear that keeps them trapped. They believe their constant effort is the only thing holding the relationship together. What they fail to realize is that if a relationship can only survive because one person is endlessly pursuing the other, it was never stable to begin with. Real strength is found in allowing people the freedom to choose. If someone wants to be in your life, They will make an effort to be there. They may not be perfect. They may have fears and insecurities, but they will show a willingness to meet you halfway. They won't require endless chasing just to maintain basic connection. When you stop chasing, something powerful happens. Your focus shifts away from controlling another person's behavior and back toward your own life. You reclaim your energy. You stop obsessing over every interaction. You stop trying to earn affection that should be given freely. Instead of asking, how do I get them to come closer? You begin asking, why am I investing so much in someone who keeps stepping away? That question changes everything. Because the goal was never to convince someone to stay. The goal was always to become the kind of person who refuses to beg for what should be mutual. The moment you stop running after someone who is running from you, you create space for clarity. You see the relationship for what it truly is, not what you hope it could become. And in that clarity, you discover something incredibly important. Your value does not increase by chasing someone who cannot recognize it. Your value was there all along. The only thing missing was your willingness to recognize it yourself. One of the most dangerous traps people fall into when dealing with an avoidant person is making their self-worth dependent on receiving that person's approval. At first, it happens so subtly that you barely notice it. You begin the relationship feeling confident, secure, and comfortable with who you are. But as time passes and the avoidant becomes inconsistent, distant, or emotionally unavailable, something changes. Instead of questioning whether their behavior is healthy for you, you begin questioning yourself. You start wondering what you're doing wrong. You ask yourself why they seem interested one day and detached the next. And before long, your focus shifts away from your own value and toward earning theirs. The problem with this mindset is that it creates a never-ending cycle of emotional dependence. Every interaction becomes a test. If they respond quickly, you feel good about yourself. If they seem affectionate, your confidence rises. But if they pull away, become distant, or fail to meet your expectations, your self-esteem drops. In other words, you hand over control of your emotional well-being to someone who may not even be capable of providing the consistency you need. Many people don't realize they're doing this. They tell themselves they're simply trying to make the relationship work. They believe they're being patient, understanding, and supportive. But underneath those good intentions is often a desperate desire to be chosen. They want proof that they are important enough, attractive enough, lovable enough, or valuable enough. They hope that if they can finally get the avoidant to fully commit, it will somehow validate their worth as a person. But here's the truth that changes everything. Your value is not determined by another person's ability to recognize it. Think about how many incredible people have been rejected, misunderstood, ignored, or taken for granted. Their worth didn't disappear simply because someone failed to appreciate them. The same principle applies to you. An avoidant person's inability to provide consistent emotional connection says far more about their own struggles than it does about your value. Unfortunately, when people become obsessed with gaining approval, they start making sacrifices they never imagined they would make. They tolerate behavior that hurts them. They lower standards they once considered non-negotiable. They excuse repeated disappointments. They accept breadcrumbs while convincing themselves they're being patient. Slowly, they begin abandoning pieces of themselves in exchange for the hope of being chosen. This is where self-respect begins to erode. Every time you ignore your own needs to keep someone comfortable, you send yourself a message. Every time you stay silent about something that hurts you because you're afraid they'll leave, you send yourself a message. Every time you accept less than you deserve because you fear losing the relationship, you send yourself a message. And that message is simple. Their comfort matters more than your well-being. Over time, that belief becomes incredibly damaging. You stop trusting your own instincts. You stop honoring your own standards. You become so focused on preserving the relationship that you forget to preserve yourself. The irony is that approval becomes even harder to obtain when you desperately seek it. People are naturally drawn to confidence, authenticity, and self-respect. When your entire emotional state depends on another person's validation, you unconsciously communicate insecurity. Your actions become driven by fear rather than genuine connection. You're no longer showing up as your authentic self. You're showing up as the version of yourself you think will finally earn their approval. But approval earned through self-abandonment is never satisfying. Even if the avoidant suddenly gives you the attention you've been craving, the relief is temporary. Why? Because the deeper issue was never their approval. The deeper issue was your belief that you needed it in order to feel worthy. True confidence comes from a different place. It comes from knowing who you are, regardless of who stays or leaves. It comes from understanding that your worth is not negotiable. It comes from recognizing that you bring value to a relationship simply by being the person you are, not because someone else decides you're valuable. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or believing you're perfect. It means refusing to measure your worth through another person's inconsistent behavior. It means understanding that rejection does not diminish you. Distance does not diminish you. Someone's inability to meet your needs does not diminish you. When you truly embrace this mindset, everything changes. You stop chasing validation and start evaluating compatibility. Instead of asking, how can I get them to choose me? You begin asking, are they capable of giving me the kind of relationship I deserve? Instead of constantly proving your value, you start recognizing it yourself. That shift is powerful because it puts you back in control. Your happiness no longer rises and falls based on a text message, a phone call, or a moment of affection. You become emotionally grounded. You stop living in a state of constant uncertainty because you know that regardless of what happens, you'll be okay. The strongest position you can ever occupy in any relationship is one where your self-respect is non-negotiable. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, not because you're trying to gain leverage, but because you understand a simple truth. No amount of love, attention, or validation from another person can replace the respect you owe yourself. The moment you stop seeking your worth in someone else's approval, you become free. Free from overthinking. Free from constant anxiety. Free from the exhausting need to prove yourself. And once you reach that place, you no longer need someone to choose you in order to feel valuable. You already know your value, and that knowledge is something no one can take away. One of the most important lessons you can learn when dealing with an avoidant person is that boundaries are not optional, they are essential. Without boundaries, relationships quickly become confusing, emotionally exhausting, and one-sided. Many people believe that being loving means being endlessly patient, endlessly understanding, and endlessly available. They think that if they just tolerate enough inconsistency, enough mixed signals, or enough emotional distance, things will eventually improve. But what often happens instead is that they teach others how little they are willing to accept for themselves. A boundary is not a wall designed to keep people out. It is a standard that protects your emotional well-being. It defines what behavior you will accept and what behavior you will not. It communicates that your feelings, needs, and values matter just as much as anyone else's. Without boundaries, people can continuously cross lines without consequences, leaving you feeling frustrated, resentful, and powerless. This becomes especially important when dealing with avoidant individuals because avoidants often struggle with emotional closeness, communication, and consistency. That doesn't make them bad people. It simply means they may have habits and coping mechanisms that can create challenges within relationships. They may disappear during conflict, withdraw when emotions become intense, or create distance when intimacy increases. If you do not have clear boundaries, you can easily find yourself constantly adapting to their behavior while neglecting your own needs. Many people make the mistake of setting boundaries verbally, but never enforcing them. They say things like, I need better communication, or I don't like being ignored, or I need consistency. Yet when the behavior continues, they do nothing. They remain available. They continue investing. They continue accepting treatment that hurts them. Over time, their words lose meaning because there is no action behind them. This is why a boundary without enforcement is merely a preference. It may express what you would like, but it does not establish what you require. People learn your standards not from what you say, but from what you tolerate repeatedly. Imagine someone continuously cancels plans at the last minute. You express your disappointment. They apologize. Then they do it again, and again, and again. At some point, the issue is no longer their behavior. The issue becomes your willingness to accept it. Every time you allow the pattern to continue, without consequences, you unintentionally communicate that your boundary is flexible. You show that, despite your words, the behavior will still be tolerated. This is where many people struggle. They fear that enforcing boundaries will push the avoidant away. They worry about appearing demanding, controlling, or difficult. They convince themselves that patience will eventually solve the problem. But healthy boundaries are not acts of control. They are acts of self-respect. A boundary is not about forcing another person to change. It is about deciding what you will do if certain behaviors continue. You cannot control whether someone communicates consistently. You cannot control whether they become emotionally available. You cannot control whether they choose to meet your needs. But you can control your response. For example, if someone repeatedly disappears for days without explanation, your boundary is not, "You must text me every day," that attempts to control them. A healthy boundary sounds more like, "Consistent communication is important to me, and if that isn't something you're able to provide, this relationship may not be right for me." Notice the difference. One seeks to control their behavior, the other protects your own standards. Boundaries also reveal an important truth about relationships. Not everyone is compatible with you. Sometimes people hear the word boundary and assume it is a tool to fix relationships. In reality, boundaries often clarify relationships. They show whether two people can genuinely meet each other's needs. If someone consistently respects your boundaries, the relationship becomes stronger. If they consistently ignore them, the relationship reveals its limitations. This clarity is valuable because it prevents you from wasting years trying to force something that isn't working. Instead of constantly adapting yourself to fit someone else's limitations, you begin evaluating whether the relationship aligns with your values. Another reason boundaries are so powerful is that they reduce resentment. Resentment often develops when people repeatedly violate their own standards in order to keep someone around. They say yes when they want to say no. They stay silent when they need to speak up. They accept behavior that hurts them because they fear conflict or rejection. Over time, those sacrifices accumulate. Eventually, frustration turns into bitterness. Healthy boundaries prevent this by creating honesty. They allow you to express your needs clearly and confidently. They remove the need for mind reading, guessing, and silent suffering. They create an environment where both people understand what is expected and what is unacceptable. Most importantly, boundaries reinforce your relationship with yourself. Every time you honor your standards, you strengthen self-trust. You prove to yourself that your needs matter. You demonstrate that your emotional well-being deserves protection. You stop abandoning yourself in order to maintain someone else's comfort. The strongest people are not those who tolerate the most pain. They are those who understand their worth well enough to establish standards and uphold them consistently. They know that love without boundaries eventually becomes sacrifice. They know that understanding someone else's struggles does not require accepting behavior that damages their own peace. And they know that real self-respect is not expressed through words alone. It is expressed through action. When you set boundaries and truly mean them, you stop living in reaction to another person's behavior. You stop negotiating away your needs. You stop hoping people will magically change. Instead, you create a life and a relationship built on mutual respect. And whether the avoidant chooses to meet those standards or not, you remain grounded in something far more important: your commitment to yourself. One of the most emotionally draining mistakes people make when dealing with an avoidant person is believing that it is their responsibility to heal them. It usually starts from a place of compassion. You see their struggles. You recognize their fears. You notice the walls they have built around themselves and the difficulty they have with vulnerability. Because you care about them, you naturally want to help. You want to be patient. You want to show them what healthy love looks like. You want to give them the understanding they may have never received before. These intentions are admirable, but they can quickly become dangerous when helping turns into rescuing. The moment you begin believing that someone's emotional growth depends on your effort, you place a burden on yourself that was never yours to carry. You start treating the relationship like a mission rather than a partnership. Every problem becomes yours to solve. Every emotional struggle becomes yours to manage. Every setback becomes your responsibility. Instead of focusing on whether your own needs are being met, you become consumed by helping them overcome their fears. Many people fall into this trap because they confuse love with sacrifice. They believe that if they can just be patient enough, supportive enough, understanding enough, or forgiving enough, the avoidant person will eventually transform. They imagine a future version of the relationship where all the emotional distance disappears, and their efforts are finally rewarded. The problem is that they become attached to potential rather than reality. Potential is powerful because it keeps people hopeful. It convinces them to stay longer than they should. It encourages them to overlook warning signs. It whispers that things will be different someday. But relationships are not built on potential. They are built on present behavior. No matter how much potential someone has, it means very little if they are unwilling to do the work required for change. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. You cannot heal another person's attachment wounds for them. You can offer support. You can provide encouragement. You can create a safe environment. You can communicate with kindness and empathy. But you cannot force someone to confront fears they are unwilling to face. You cannot make someone become emotionally available before they are ready. You cannot do their inner work on their behalf. Healing requires personal responsibility. It requires self-awareness, effort, and a willingness to change. No amount of love from another person can replace that process. In fact, when people try too hard to rescue an avoidant, they often make the situation worse without realizing it. Why? Because rescuing creates dependency rather than growth. When you constantly compensate for someone else's shortcomings, they never experience the consequences of their behavior. If you always initiate communication, they never learn to reach out. If you always repair conflicts, they never learn conflict resolution. If you always provide emotional stability while receiving very little in return, they never develop the motivation to improve their own emotional skills. Over time, the relationship becomes unbalanced. One person is carrying most of the emotional weight, while the other remains passive. This dynamic creates exhaustion. The rescuer becomes increasingly frustrated because their efforts don't seem to produce lasting change. Meanwhile, the avoidant may become comfortable relying on the relationship without fully addressing their own patterns. Another problem with the rescue mentality is that it shifts your attention away from yourself. Instead of asking whether the relationship is healthy for you, you become focused on helping the other person heal. Instead of evaluating whether your needs are being met, you become preoccupied with meeting theirs. Instead of protecting your emotional well-being, you dedicate your energy to fixing theirs. Eventually, you may wake up one day feeling emotionally depleted. You've invested months or even years trying to help someone grow, only to realize that your own needs have been neglected in the process. You've spent so much time supporting them that you've forgotten to support yourself. This is why healthy relationships require personal accountability from both people. A relationship should never consist of one person acting as the therapist, savior, teacher, and emotional caretaker, while the other simply receives. Both individuals must take responsibility for their own growth. Both must be willing to confront their own challenges. Both must actively participate in creating a healthy connection. Letting go of the need to rescue someone does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you become cold or indifferent. It simply means you recognize the limits of your influence. You understand that love can inspire change, but it cannot force it. You acknowledge that another person's healing journey belongs to them. There is tremendous freedom in accepting this reality. The moment you stop trying to fix someone, you release yourself from an impossible responsibility. You stop measuring your success by their progress. You stop blaming yourself for their setbacks. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. Instead, you begin focusing on what you can control. You can control your boundaries. You can control your standards. You can control how you respond to situations. You can control the kind of relationships you choose to invest in. These are areas where your energy can actually create meaningful results. One of the strongest acts of self-respect is recognizing when your role is to support rather than save. Support says, I care about you, and I hope you grow. Rescue says, your growth is my responsibility. The first is healthy. The second is unsustainable. At the end of the day, every person must choose their own path. Every person must decide whether they are willing to confront their fears, heal their wounds, and become a better partner. You cannot make that decision for them. What you can do is decide how long you are willing to wait, how much you are willing to tolerate, and whether the relationship is meeting your needs in the present moment. When you stop trying to rescue an avoidant person, you reclaim your energy, your peace, and your sense of self. You stop carrying the weight of another person's wreath, healing, and start carrying something far more valuable, responsibility for your own life. And that is where true strength begins. One of the most powerful shifts you can make when dealing with an avoidant person is learning how to detach from the outcome. This does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you become cold, indifferent, or emotionally unavailable yourself. It means you stop tying your happiness, self-worth, and peace of mind to a specific result. You stop believing that your future depends on whether this one person chooses you, stays with you, or gives you the relationship you want. Many people enter relationships with expectations, dreams, and hopes. There is nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when those hopes become emotional dependencies. Instead of wanting the relationship, they begin needing it. Instead of appreciating the connection, they become attached to a particular outcome. They convince themselves that everything will be okay once the avoidant commits, becomes more available, or finally gives them the reassurance they've been waiting for. This mindset creates tremendous emotional pressure because your well-being becomes dependent on something you cannot control. You cannot control another person's choices. You cannot control their level of emotional readiness. You cannot control whether they decide to confront their fears or continue running from low intimacy. Yet many people spend months or even years trying to manage things that are completely outside their influence. The result is constant anxiety. Every text message feels significant. Every conversation is analyzed. Every moment of distance feels like a threat. Every sign of affection creates hope, while every sign of withdrawal creates fear. Life begins to feel like an emotional roller coaster, controlled by another person's behavior. This is especially common with avoidant individuals because their inconsistency can create uncertainty. One day they seem warm, engaged, and affectionate. The next day they seem distant, distracted, or unavailable. For someone who is emotionally invested, these shifts can become consuming. They start chasing certainty in an uncertain situation. They search for signs, clues, and guarantees that simply do not exist. The deeper issue is not the avoidance behavior itself. The deeper issue is attachment to a specific outcome. When you become emotionally attached to one particular result, you lose flexibility. You stop accepting reality as it is and begin fighting reality in hopes that it will become what you want. Detachment changes this completely. Detachment means accepting that while you can influence a situation, you cannot control it. You can communicate your needs clearly. You can show up with honesty and effort. You can be patient, understanding, and supportive. But beyond that, the outcome belongs to both people, not just you. When you truly embrace this perspective, an incredible sense of freedom begins to emerge. You stop trying to force relationships into existence. You stop exhausting yourself attempting to make someone ready before they are ready. You stop treating every interaction as a test of whether the relationship will survive. Instead, you begin focusing on what is actually happening in the present moment. You ask yourself important questions. Is this relationship meeting my needs? Is this person capable of providing the consistency I deserve? Am I happy with the reality of this connection, not just the potential? These questions create clarity because they shift your attention away from fantasy and back toward reality. Many people stay stuck because they are attached to who someone could become rather than who they currently are. Detachment allows you to see people clearly. It removes the emotional fog created by hope, fear, and desperation. Another reason detachment is so powerful is that it restores your sense of personal power. When you are attached to an outcome, your emotions are constantly reacting to external circumstances. If things go well, you feel secure. If things go poorly, you feel devastated. Your emotional state rises and falls based on events outside your control. Detachment reverses that dynamic. Instead of depending on external validation, you begin building internal stability. Your happiness no longer depends on whether someone texts back immediately. Your confidence no longer depends on whether someone chooses you. Your peace no longer depends on a specific relationship outcome. This does not mean rejection stops hurting. It does not mean disappointment disappears. You are still human. You will still experience sadness, frustration, and loss. The difference is that these experiences no longer define your identity. They become events you move through rather than prisons you live inside. People often fear detachment because they mistake it for giving up. They worry that if they stop holding on so tightly, they will lose the relationship. But true detachment is not giving up. It is letting go of the illusion of control. It is recognizing that healthy relationships cannot be forced, negotiated, or manipulated into existence. In fact, detachment often creates healthier connections because it removes desperation from the equation. When you no longer need a specific outcome, you show up more authentically. You communicate more honestly. You make decisions based on self-respect rather than fear. You stop accepting poor treatment simply because you are afraid of losing someone. Perhaps the greatest benefit of detachment is the peace it brings. Imagine waking up without constantly wondering where you stand. Imagine no longer spending hours analyzing messages or predicting someone's next move. Imagine trusting yourself enough to know that whatever happens, you will be okay. That is the true power of detachment. It is not about becoming emotionally numb. It is about becoming emotionally free. At the end of the day, your life is bigger than any one relationship. Your future is bigger than any one person's decision. Your happiness is too valuable to be placed entirely in someone else's hands. When you detach from the outcome, you stop living in fear of loss and start living from a place of confidence and trust. You trust that what is meant for you will not require endless chasing. You trust that healthy relationships involve mutual effort, and most importantly, you trust that regardless of how things unfold, you have the strength to move forward, grow, and create a fulfilling life on your own terms. That is where real freedom begins, not when you get the outcome you wanted, but when you realize you will be okay, no matter what the outcome is. Perhaps the hardest lesson anyone can learn when dealing with an avoidant person is that there comes a point when you must be willing to walk away. Not because you stopped loving them, not because you are angry, not because you want to punish them or prove a point. You become willing to walk away because you finally understand that no relationship is worth sacrificing your self-respect, your peace of mind, or your emotional well-being. Many people spend months, sometimes years, holding on to relationships that continuously leave them feeling confused, anxious, and emotionally exhausted. They keep telling themselves that things will improve if they are just a little more patient. They believe that if they love hard enough, understand enough, or wait long enough, the avoidant person will eventually become the partner they need. Every small sign of progress becomes a reason to stay. Every moment of affection renews hope. Every promise of change creates another opportunity to wait. The problem is that hope can sometimes become a trap. Hope is valuable when it inspires action and growth. But when hope keeps you stuck in a situation that consistently hurts you, it becomes dangerous. It convinces you to ignore reality. It encourages you to focus on what could happen instead of what is happening. You become so invested in the future version of the relationship that you stop paying attention to the present one. This is why the willingness to walk away is so important. It forces you to confront reality. It requires you to evaluate the relationship based on actual behavior rather than potential. Instead of asking, what might this become someday, you begin asking, what is this relationship giving me right now? That question can be uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It removes fantasies. It removes wishful thinking. It demands honesty. If someone consistently avoids communication, avoids accountability, avoids intimacy, or avoids meeting your needs, you eventually have to ask yourself how long you are willing to accept that reality. Not because they are a bad person, not because they are intentionally trying to hurt you, but because your needs matter too. One of the biggest fears people have about walking away is the fear of loss. They imagine the pain they will feel if the relationship ends. They worry about loneliness. They worry about regret. They worry that they may never find someone else. Because of these fears, they stay in situations that no longer serve them. What they often fail to recognize is that staying can create its own form of loss. Every day you spend abandoning your own needs is a loss. Every time you ignore your intuition, compromise your standards, or accept treatment that diminishes your self-worth, you lose a little more of your connection with yourself. Over time, that loss becomes far more damaging than the pain of letting go. Walking away is not only about leaving another person, it is often about returning to yourself. It is about remembering who you were before you became consumed by uncertainty. It is about reconnecting with your confidence, your goals, your values, and your peace. It is about choosing yourself after spending so much time choosing someone else's comfort over your own well-being. Many people mistakenly believe that the strongest person in a relationship is the one who can endure the most pain. They think strength means holding on, no matter what. They think loyalty means staying, regardless of how they are treated. But true strength is not measured by how much suffering you can tolerate. True strength is measured by your willingness to honor your standards, even when doing so is difficult. Sometimes strength looks like staying and working through challenges together, but sometimes strength looks like recognizing that the relationship is no longer healthy and having the courage to leave. The willingness to walk away also changes the energy of the relationship itself. When you stop operating from fear of loss, you stop accepting behavior that violates your standards. You stop negotiating away your needs just to keep someone around. You stop chasing, pleading, convincing, and proving. You begin standing firmly in your value. Ironically, this is often the moment people become most attractive, not because they are trying to create distance or play games, but because confidence is attractive. Self-respect is attractive. The ability to walk away from situations that do not align with your values demonstrates emotional maturity and inner strength. However, it is important to understand that walking away should never be used as a strategy to manipulate someone into changing. If your goal is to leave so they will chase you, you are still emotionally dependent on the outcome. You are still seeking validation. Real willingness to walk away means accepting that they may never change. It means accepting that they may never become the partner you hoped they would be. It means understanding that your life can still be meaningful, fulfilling, and joyful regardless of what they choose. This level of acceptance is incredibly powerful because it frees you from emotional captivity. You no longer feel trapped by someone else's decisions. You no longer believe your happiness depends on their growth. You no longer wait endlessly for permission to move forward with your life. Instead, you take ownership of your future. You invest in your personal growth. You strengthen your relationships with family and friends. You pursue your goals. You build a life that feels complete, whether someone else chooses to join you or not. And that is the real lesson. The ultimate power in any relationship does not come from controlling another person. It does not come from making someone love you. It does not come from convincing someone to stay. The ultimate power comes from knowing that you will never abandon yourself in order to keep someone else. When you reach that point, everything changes. Fear loses its grip. Desperation disappears. clarity emerges, and whether the avoidant comes closer, remains distant, or leaves entirely, you remain grounded in something that cannot be taken away, your self-respect. Because at the end of the day, the person most willing to walk away is not the person who cares the least. Often, they are the person who has finally learned to care about themselves enough to stop accepting less than they deserve.